This is Talk Talk on what we believe and why. Power Talk addresses the questions that are often asked by an investigating heart. A heart that is looking for the truth of life. Just as we dig for answers into science with an expectation to find answers, we dig into the questions about life's truths to find answers because we know they are there. There is no place for blind faith in either science nor religion in our age of skepticism.
When we're uncertain, when there is loss, when we are wounded, when there is fear,
Let's talk on COVID-19 and God. What is God up to in this pandemic that is going around the world? This talk was given on the Africa Mercy on May 1st, 2020, while we were docked in Tenerife, Spain. I'm Tertius Venter, a plastic and reconstructive surgeon serving full-time as a volunteer with Mercy Ships, as well as with Operation Smile and with the organization PAX. We as humans can rightly ask, why COVID-19? Where is it coming from? And what is the meaning in this? What is this miracle that is still smiting man, modern man? Is there any sense in this pain and suffering? Is there really meaning that we can find in this? What is this virus and what is God up to in this pandemic? I'd really like to approach this from two angles, these questions. The first is the how question, and secondly the why question. So the how question is, how did this virus come about and what is this doing? What are the facts behind this virus? And then secondly is the why question. So the why question always gives us the meaning behind the how question. So is there any meaning in this? Can we find any meaning in this virus that's still smiting man, the man of the 21st century? If we look at this virus, a virus that's spread around the world within a couple of months from seemingly nowhere, and really upset the whole world and personal lives and shaking economies and grinding major airlines to a halt and coming down into each one of our personal lives and removing the stability from our feet, and just make us know how fragile we are and how short life is. And what a virus really is a tiny piece of lifeless information that can go nowhere unless it's carried passively to a living cell. And it is really tiny. 500 million viruses fit on a pinhead. And it is nothing but a piece of lifeless information. It's like an envelope with a message inside. When it's outside the body, there's nothing that can define it as being alive. It needs to be carried by an agent to a living cell to become alive. And God, where is He in this? Is there perhaps something like the gift of suffering? And we read that for this reason I will fence you in with thorn bushes. I will block your path with a wall to make you lose your way. You've been looking for your lovers, but forgot all about me. But I will lead you in the desert and speak tenderly to you there. We can so easily put God behind all our other activities in life and forget about Him. But He will always come behind us, and He will always chase us down, even if He needs to put us in a desert where He can speak alone and tenderly to us. So really, to understand what God is up to and what God is doing is to understand what a virus is. And what's really important is that we've got to understand that evil or Satan can never create anything that is created. He is unable to create anything. Only God can create in this world that we live in. So how do we think about COVID-19 then? And why is it present? Viruses are numerous and they are everywhere. They're present in every living creature, from bacteria to plant life to animal life in humans. They're just everywhere. In fact, the number of viruses outnumber the cellular life on Earth by 10 to 1. They present the greatest biodiversity on Earth. The biomass of bacteria in the oceans on this planet, which is attached to bacteria, and this is what it looks like, with just a DNA and sometimes an RNA that is surrounded by a capsule or a capsid head. And that is the basic structure. The bottom of that picture just shows the area that will help the bacteria of the virus to inject the message of the DNA into the bacteria. And these viruses on the bacteria, attached to bacteria in the ocean, the biomass of this exceeds elephants on this planet in weight by 100-fold. And this is a picture of multiple viruses sitting on bacteria. In 1 liter of seawater, there are more viruses than people on this planet. Now, we know the planet has almost got 8 billion people now. And the sizes of a virus, as I've mentioned, the average virus is about 50 micron in size. In other words, 500 million viruses can fit on a pinhead of 2 by 2 millimeters wide. So we as humans, we breathe and eat in our food billions of viral particles every day. And there are millions of types of viruses. And only a very small number of these millions of types can cause disease in man. The examples are, and there are numerous examples that we know of. We can think of yellow fever, of pox, chicken pox, all the well-known viral infections that we know of. Measles and rubella is very common, but usually our body would be able to defend ourselves against these viruses before it can do too much damage. But still, if we are underfed, malnourished, and our immune system is suppressed for some reason, this can easily cause death. And it still causes death in third world countries around the world of hundreds of thousands every year because of a lack of vaccination, and then going hand in hand with poor nutrition. And then the influenza viruses that causes annual global outbreaks around the world still causes hundreds of thousands of deaths. In America alone, it's about an average of 40,000 deaths a year. Some viruses like the HIV virus and the herpes simplex virus 1 and 2 that causes cold sores and genital warts stay permanently in the body, and your body can never get rid of it. So how many deaths are actually caused by viruses a year? Now, the 2017 statistics shows us that respiratory deaths is about 15,000 people every day, of which influenza, which is a virus, is a major contributor to this. There's obviously many other reasons for respiratory deaths, like cancer and smoking. Diarrheal disease around the world, approximately 4,000 people every day die because of diarrhea. And here again, we're looking at the third world countries where virus play a major role in these deaths. And then some viruses that is exclusively the virus causing the deaths, hepatitis, 126,000 per year, and that is mainly hepatitis B and C. Hepatitis A is not the dangerous one, but B and C is the ones that's causing the deaths. and then HIV, still almost a million deaths per year. So from these two viruses, almost 3,000 people die every day as a result of being infected by these viruses. And then we can look at the virus, the Spanish flu, the last major pandemic, viral pandemic that the world have seen 100 years ago. This was not a coronavirus like the present Covid-19 virus, but it was orthomixovirus H1N1 that caused a pandemic that ran over a 3-year period. Approximately 5 million people was infected by this virus, and about 40 to 50 million deaths. Now, I know we can't directly extrapolate from this, but if we can give some idea, so if we would leave the COVID virus to just run free over the world, and we extrapolate these figures into today's figures of almost 8 million, that means we could expect about 2 billion people infected by the virus and maybe 200 million deaths. And that's why it's so important to contain this virus. So why is it so difficult to treat a virus? Why can we get medication to treat bacteria but not viruses? Now, the reason for that is that a virus is really a very simple structure. If you look at the picture on the left, those little wavy figures in the center is the RNA or DNA of the virus, so the genetic material that's carrying the information. And around that circular lines are the capsule made of proteins and sometimes a lipid membrane with a little purple structures on top of that, and that is the capsule around it, which surrounds the genetic material on the inside. And that is basically the whole structure. On the right there is again the bacteriophage that will attach to bacteria alone, and it's got a little special base to allow it to inject the genetic material into the bacteria. But this virus as it is, as you see it there, when it's not inside a body, it is actually not a living cell or a living creature. So this is the picture of a bacterial cell, and you can see that there are numerous structures, many more structures, and much more complicated biochemical processes going on the inside. And then it's much easier to develop a drug that can damage one of these structures that might be vital for the survival of the bacteria, or to interfere with these biochemical processes and then kill the bacteria. The problem with the virus is that the genetic material on the inside, the RNA or DNA, is exactly what we have in our own cells. And the capsule around it, made of proteins and lipids, is exactly what we have in our own cells. So if you develop a drug that will target one of those structures, you will damage your own cells. So a virus is an intracellular parasite and can only replicate within a cell. If it does not find a host within a specific time period, it will just disintegrate and disappear. The picture on the bottom left is a picture of a human cell. With the big purple circle is the nucleus, that within that contains all your genetic material, the DNA. So DNA and RNA, like our own genes, are literally genetic codes. They are letters, like letters in a book that contains information, but is not the information itself. So if you look at a book, the letters make sense, but the book is just the carrier of the information, and that is exactly what genetic material is. If you look at the picture on the right bottom, on the left side is RNA, so that's usually a single strand of a sugar chain, really, with a phosphate base, and then those little colored areas there are the nucleotides, and they are in humans comes as pairs of 2, and they represent the letters that carries the genetic information. Now, it has been shown and worked out when they completed the work on the human genome that there are 3.2 billion of these letters in the human chromosomes. That is the one on the right hand side with these opposite pairs that fit into each other and representing the letters. So our genetic material contains 3.2 billion letters to instruct our cells exactly what to do, exactly how to put us together, to form new cells, all the different cells, how to form a liver, an eye, and everything we need to be a human, as well as our personality and the ability to compose music, to write books. It's all contained in these 3.2 billion letters. So when a mother and father comes together and their cells, the sperm and the ovum fuses together at conception, this is the information within their chromosomes, their 23 chromosomes, that's carried to their child. But the moment the second cell is being formed from that, it starts losing the original physical base that was forming that child. And at the end, nothing will be left of the physical properties of those parents, but just the information. So it's really like a father has got a book with all his information in every little detail of him, and the mother has got a book, and they give it to the child. The child takes the 2 books and then rewrites his own book from these 2 books, using all that information to put the information together to make him a human with all his properties, physical and psychological properties, and then throws the 2 books from mom and dad away, and only the information that he got from that book is left within him. So it's the same with a virus. The virus just contains information. So within that circle on the inside, where, like in the COVID-19 virus, it's a RNA, a single-strand RNA virus, RNA structure that contains the information, and the letters of the COVID-19 is around about 30,000 letters, and that is enough to give your cell the information to make new viruses, and then the original virus that was entering your cell will disintegrate and disappear. So a virus is not a living organism, not by any definition. It's a passive agent. It is like a book or a leaflet that's lying in the street, and it needs to be picked up and carried to a host, and to a very specific host cell, and then as it enters that cell, it will become alive. So it has the capacity to come alive when it enters the cell, and that is what we call when it infects the cell. The cell now becomes the slave of that viral genetic material, and it becomes devoted to produce viral particles, to produce new viruses. So if you can see on the picture there at the top is where the virus comes into contact with the cell. It has those little structures on the outside, and those structures has got to be very specific to connect with the receptor on the cell. Once it does that, it will then go into the cell, release the genetic information, the RNA, and the cell will start responding to that and really becomes the slave of that cell and just of that virus, and just start making more and more viral particles. So for a virus to infect a cell, there are 2 conditions that's important. The cell has to be susceptible as well as permissive. So what do we mean by susceptible? It means that that virus that's coming to a cell must have the structures on its surface to bind with the cell. But the cell itself, the host cell, in other words, in COVID-19's case, our respiratory cells have to have the specific receptor to accept that virus so that they can bind together. And that receptor has been identified as the ACE2 receptor. So our respiratory cells has got that receptor, and it will bind to the virus, allow it to bind to it. That's why it doesn't affect other parts of our body, because other cells in our body doesn't have that receptor, and only our respiratory cells. So once it's connected to it and they've bound together, the virus will enter and then release its genetic information. So that information that was contained in the envelope, which is really a dark, evil message, and it will take over the cell, and the cell now becomes a slave and just starting making new viruses, and it will use its own cellular products. So the new viruses are made from your own cell products that's present in your cell, and it will start making new components, new RNA, new capsid around it, and produce the exact viruses again, until so many viruses are formed that it will then be released from that cell to infect cells around it. So the COVID-19 virus is one of the coronaviruses, and at this stage COVID-19 virus is the seventh coronavirus that's infecting man and causing severe disease, respiratory diseases in man. In humans, coronaviruses cause respiratory tract infections specifically, and it can really range from mild to lethal infections. Mild infections, like the common cold. There are coronaviruses that is just causing a common cold, although the cold is predominantly caused by rhinoviruses. But there are more lethal forms, and the ones that we've seen recently are the SARS and the MERS viruses, which were all coronaviruses. So where did this virus come from? This virus has most probably been present for millions of years in animals, and did not cause any infection in animals because their cells didn't have the specific receptors on their surface to cause severe disease in them. But something has got to happen then within that animal for that to jump to people, which is called the zoonotic transfer. So what the theory is, and that is still the most commonly held theory, where this specific COVID-19 virus comes from, is that it comes from wild mammals and most probably from the bat. And that is from the wet markets in China. So what happens there is that these wild animals are being caught and put in very small cages in these markets, where they are then being slaughtered and often eaten at the spot or taken home. But these animals are under tremendous stress. So stress suppresses your immune system. So these viruses can then start increasing in that period that they are kept in these cages. And then by the time they get killed, the viruses are much more numerous within their bodies, and then people eat that, and then it starts growing within the human, and then starts spreading from one human to the next one. So sort of in summary, for humans to be infected by a COVID-19 virus, we need a virus that previously existed. So, as I said, probably millions of years, and then, but was almost in a symbiotic relation with the animal that it was in, not causing any severe problems for the animal. But then you need a disturbance of the natural habitat of that animal, put him under stress, suppress his immune system, overgrowth of the virus, and then people consume that animal, and it is transferred to humans. So this virus, this genetic material carrying then the exact information that can infect a human cell, allow it to enter it and to start reproducing. So the viral membrane has to have the receptor on the human airway cell to accept this virus, to allow it to release its message, the information of how to make more viruses into the cell. So you need a susceptible cell to do that. And one can obviously ask the question, why would an animal virus have the properties to bind to a specific human cell and a human respiratory cell? Why? How did that happen? And then the human respiratory cell need to have the ability to read the RNA virus. If it can't read the RNA information, nothing will happen to that virus on the inside. So it needs to be a specific permissive cell that have the potential or the ability to read this information and then become the slave of this information and start making more and more viruses from its own components. And you just ask, how and why did this happen? And then the cell will keep on manufacturing new viral components until a respiratory cell releases these viruses and the original virus will disintegrate. So if you think of the first viruses that happened in China, that original virus has disintegrated. The only thing that has been transferred is the information to the next virus and the information to the next virus. So it's the information that's carried along that is causing the problem. So as the cells produces more and more viruses and releases it, these new viruses that is now formed with a same message but a totally new virus with a totally new structure components needs to find another susceptible and permissive cell. So it will spread within the body of the same patient and start growing, and that is what the incubation period is meant by. So from the time you get your first virus and it starts replicating until so many of your cells are infected by it that you start showing symptoms, which can be anything from 2, 3, 4 days to 14 days. So now your body's own immune system will recognize these foreign bodies and try to destroy it. Very often, and we know a lot of people with COVID-19 won't even have symptoms, so your body will recognize this virus, fight it and eliminate it before it causes too much problems. But sometimes your immune system is incapable of overcoming this overwhelming infection, and this can lead to a severe infection and sometimes death. But sometimes also your immune reaction to it can cause almost more damage than the virus itself. Or thirdly, the virus can spread then from the patient who's got the infection and his cells are infected. So now when he coughs and sneezes because of the symptoms the virus gives him, it is released outside again now as dead information, but it will float in air drops and either inhaled by the next person or it will fall on the surface and you will touch it and carry it on into yourself, and the new virus will find then a new host that it will infect. So the original virus will disintegrate with each cell that they invade and be destroyed, and completely new virus just with the original information will go forth and infect new cells. So if you think about the why questions now behind all of this, the first question I would propose or think about is, why are there viruses and why are there so many? And then why is it only that a small percentage of them causing infections in animals, birds and humans? Why are there millions of types of different viruses? and only a relatively small percentage will cause problems. And then if you think about a pandemic, there was one 100 years ago. Why is there a pandemic? Why is it not every 400 years? Why is it not every 5 years? A pandemic that caused 50 million deaths, and in today's figures maybe 200 million deaths. And you think, is there something or someone in control of this? It almost seems to me that there's a balance between good and evil. Evil is not strong enough to overcome good and is being kept at bay, but good is also not overwhelming evil at this stage. And there's a balance between that. So if we just think of the mode of transfer, if we think of Ebola, which is a deadly virus with a 90% mortality rate, in other words, 90% of patients can die because of Ebola when they get infected. But the transfer from one person to another is much more difficult than with COVID-19. It's got to be almost direct contact with body fluids. It has to be direct contact with body fluids, otherwise it won't spread. So there's no droplet that can float in the air or being kept alive on surfaces. Imagine that a deadly disease like Ebola was spreading as easy as COVID-19. It can potentially wipe out the whole human race. Is there a force that is sitting behind this and controlling it? We can also think about even HIV that has got to be specifically transferred by sexual contact or direct with blood transfusion. But an infection, again, with a high mortality rate that you can never eliminate from the body. Imagine COVID, or imagine that HIV can spread as easy as COVID-19. And then just the question behind, how is it possible that a virus from a wild animal has to have the specific structure and needs a very specific target to cause disease. So from an animal where it caused no disease in to a human respiratory cell which needs to have the exact cell surface receptor and exact structure on the inside to be able to read this. And you can just ask, why? What is the meaning of this? So why does these viruses that seem so specifically designed, causing specific morbidities and mortalities, why does it seem like it is so exactly designed? Like these morbidities and mortalities that we can study right all over the world, that's causing so much pain and suffering, but it is so specific that we can do studies on different continents, different cultures, and it's exactly the same in everybody. Is this whole scenario of viruses in total and of specifically seem to be designed viruses, can it be just a stroke of bad luck, of a cosmos that doesn't care and has no feelings for us? Do we just have to accept it in a pitiless, cold, impersonal, indifferent universe that is here, came into existence without reason, and is on its way to a meaningless death, eventual death of the universe? And that is what science shows us, that if you just look at science alone, the time of the Big Bang, what we know now how that started and how it has developed over the billions of years. But there's a question behind it. Why did it start? What made it happen? And what is the meaning of it? And we know that the universe is expanding since the Big Bang, and it's still expanding at an accelerating rate every day. and losing energy. Eventually, the universe will run out of energy and everything will come to just a cold, dark graveyard of black holes and burnt out stars. And then nobody will remember that there were ever human beings that existed. Nobody will remember or have any meaning in what you've done today or tomorrow or in your life, and whether it has any meaning. It will have no meaning because there's nobody who will reflect on it. There will be nothing left, just a black, dark graveyard. This is unavoidable if we do not believe in God. This is what science shows us. These are the facts that will happen. But if there is a God, then even if we know that the world and the universe will come to an end, which the Bible tells us it will, in accordance with science, but there's meaning in it. So we might find sense in the senseless world. In our fight to survive, we can find meaning in it. And even with this COVID-19, there is sense in pain and suffering. And that is the question that I ask as a why question. Is there something like the gift of pain? Now, Paul Brandt is a surgeon that worked in a developing country who wrote a book, The Gift of Pain. And he's a surgeon who worked with leprosy patients and treated patients who lost their feeling in their hands and feet because of leprosy. And as we know, they often start losing parts of their hands and feet because they have no feeling in it. They can't feel to protect it and then damage it or get infection, don't get it treated, and start losing parts of their hands and feet, and often whole hands or whole feet that can be lost. So physical pain is there to protect us from physical harm. Is it possible that spiritual pain can protect us from spiritual harm? C.S. Lewis was an atheist turned Christian, and one of the most famous and well-known Christian writers, wrote that pain insists upon being attended to, which means pain grabs your attention. It makes you think, what is going on here? And makes you think and makes you ask questions. God whispers to us in our pleasures and speaks in our conscience, but He shouts in our pains. Pain is a megaphone to a deaf world. Is God not busy doing that again and again and again? What we read in the Old Testament over and over and over again, and I will come to that quite soon. And for us as a Christian, we can always take comfort in these words when we go through periods of pain. It is doubtful if God can bless a man greatly unless He's hurt him deeply. Disaster turns our hearts inward and we cry out, why? The Lord's love for the unfaithful is written in Isaiah 2:14. But then I will win her back once again. I will lead her into the desert and speak tenderly to her. It is in our suffering that we experience the deepest meaning in life, where we draw closest to God, because we reach out to Him and say, God, why? God, help me in this period. And often, and most of the times, when we look back at this, we see the spiritual growth that we've gone through in that time, if we would only seek Him in this time. It is in suffering that the best books are written in this world. The best poems are versified and music composed. The cellist Caspar Casado said, I feel sorry for you. Your lives have been so easy. You can't play great music unless your hearts have been broken. And Rumi, a 13th century Persian poet, said, the wound is the place where light enters you. And we know that from 1 John 1:5, the Bible says that God is light. So it's through our wounds that God enters our lives, enters our soul, enters our hearts. So we must never underestimate the love of God. We try to often put God in a box and make Him what we think He should be like, and to make Him want him to act the way we want him to act. But he's a radical God. And if you look at the cross, we can just see how radical his love is. And we must never underestimate what he will do to win us back to him. He created us in his image. Therefore, we have a free will. Just think about Genesis 1:1 and the Big Bang. It says, in the beginning, God created. Someone had to decide there should be a Big Bang. From the moment of the Big Bang, 13.5 billion years ago, science has worked out tremendous detail of what happened. But before that, or at that moment, and why that happened, is unexplainable. Because that is the moment that time, matter, started to exist. And someone who's outside time, matter, and space, the three things that started to exist in that moment of the Big Bang, someone had to take the decision. That's the Kalam argument, cosmological argument that says everything that exists has a cause. The universe exists, therefore the universe must have a cause. But that is what science cannot show us, what was the cause of the Big Bang. Because it's got to be something outside time, space and matter. Something that needs to take a decision for this to happen. In other words, a person. And that is exactly what the Bible writes about who God is. He is not confined to time, space or matter, and he's a person. So he created us with a free will, because he has a free will, and we are created in his image. But the free will, which is the most important thing, is to love him, because love without a free will can never be love. He had to give us a free will to choose for him. But that is the problem, that we keep on running away from this love, and love ourselves and love other things more than him. So if God would give evil or Satan free reign in this world, to say, do to animals what you like, except don't kill them, but do whatever you like, what would he do? He would give humans prosperity, good health, and a comfortable life. This is what will drive people away from God, and he knows that. So if you give a human a carefree life, financially secure, everything that he needs, that is what will make people turn away from God, say, I don't need God, everything is fine in my life. And Satan will be satisfied with his purpose for humankind, turning them away from God. So the question now is that not exactly what happened to the two most Christian continents in World War II? As prosperity grew, Christianity declined proportionately in Europe and North America, while growing in Africa, South America, and many eastern countries in the world at rates unheard of. And we know that at this stage, the beginning of May 2020, the real hotspots in the world is still Europe and North America. So, obey the commands of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a land good, of flowing streams and pools of water, with fountains and springs that gush out in the valleys and the hills. It is a land of wheat and barley, of grapevines, fig trees, pomegranates, of olive oil and honey. It is a land where food is plentiful and nothing is lacking. It's a land where iron is common as stone and copper is abundant in the hills. When you have eaten your fill, be sure to praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. And you think again about the post-war years, where it was going more prosperous and more prosperous with the nations, and how they started forgetting about God. But this is a time to be careful. Beware that in your plenty you do not forget the Lord your God and disobey his commands, regulations and decrees that I'm giving you today. For when you have become full and prosperous and have built fine houses to live in, and when your flocks and herds have become very large and your silver and gold have multiplied along with everything else, be careful. Do not become proud at that time and forget the Lord of what He has done in the past in your life, in your forefathers' lives. Do not forget that He led you through the great and terrifying wilderness. In our cases, World War II and World War I. He did so that you never can say, I have achieved this wealth with my strength and energy. It is God's blessings on us that we can prosper. So remember the Lord your God. He is the one who gives you power to be successful in order to fulfill the covenant. That's the covenant of love that He reaches out to us. And He confirmed that with our ancestors with an oath, and also with each one of us. I assure you of this, if you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods, in other words, all the things that in my life that I put above God, my education, my money, my dreams, anything that I put above God, and to worship and bowing down to them, you will certainly be destroyed. We must know, and deep inside we all know, there is no one without sin. Every one of us knows that. Who can say, I've kept my heart pure, I'm clean and without sin? If we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. No one is righteous, not even one. But God is a holy God, and He says that His eyes are too holy to look at evil. He cannot stand the sight of people doing wrong. And the reason for that is because the more holy God is, the more terrible sin is for Him. The more He loves us, the more terrible it is for Him to see how we're walking away from Him. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul and all your mind. And the second is like this, love your neighbor as yourself. And we know we're all short of this. We're all in need of grace. So God says when we do not love Him, He sees it as spiritual adultery. Because in the Bible it often talks of the nations of Israel and of us as His spouse in marriage. He loves us so much. So when we turn our backs on Him and follow other gods, other lovers, He sees it that is spiritual adultery against Him. And He will do anything to get us back to His heart. He says in Hosea 11:8, how can I give you up? How can I abandon you? Could I ever destroy you? My heart will not let me do it. My love for you is just too strong. In this radical love that we see, God will go to great lengths to win us back. If He can't win us back by being just kind and gracious to us, and we still walk away, He will get radical to get us back. If a country sins and is unfaithful to me, I will stretch out my hand and destroy its food supply. I will send famine and kill people and animals alike. This is what the Lord God is saying. I will send my four worst punishment: war, famine, wild animals, and disease. He says, I was the one who brought famine to your cities, yet you did not come back to me. He puts us in situations where we would cry out to Him in the hope that we will turn our love, use our free will to come back to Him. I sent scorching winds to dry up your crops. Still you did not come back to me. And if we read the Bible is full of similar stories. How God loves His people, how they turn their backs on Him, how He brings difficult times over them to win them back to His heart. God even calls Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, that took Israel out into slavery and took them to the far off country of Babylon for 70 years. He calls Nebuchadnezzar his servant, although he had nothing to do with a personal relationship with Nebuchadnezzar, but he uses him to teach his children who he is. And the same with the Assyrian army that invaded the northern parts of Israel. He calls it his weapon against his own people. Or in Joel we read that the locusts that came into the country and just destroyed all their food, he called it his army, he called it the army of God. Because God uses these things to bring people back to his heart. But we must never remember that he's a God of love. He's a radical God, and because of his extreme love for us, he says that he does not willingly bring affliction or grief to anyone, but he will to bring us back to him. If we keep on running away and running into eternal damnation, he will do anything to get us back to him. We read again in Isaiah about the Lord's love for us, the unfaithful people that's running away from him. But I will win you back again. I will lead you into a desert and speak tenderly to you there. Is this not the time that God is really putting us in a desert and wants to speak tenderly to us if we only want to listen to him? And the New Testament is the same. If we read what has happened there, God will go to extreme lengths to win people to his heart. Stephen was a very godly man, and then he was stoned to death because he wouldn't stop proclaiming the name of Christ. And even as he was stoned, he was praying that God would forgive the people who are stoning him because they don't understand what they're doing. And Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, was standing there and seeing what was happening. And I just wonder what effect it had on him, despite that after that he was part of the persecution of the Christians. But he must have seen this man praying for his accusers while dying. So this death of Stephen, if we think about that, could God not have prevented that? Was God's hand tied behind his back? No, God had a plan with this, because this sparked the persecution of the Christians in Jerusalem. And the gospel started spreading from Jerusalem outside its borders and right over the whole known world of that time. And if you think then of Paul himself, not long after that period, he was on his way to Damascus to continue with the persecution of the Christians. But then he had that experience on the road to Damascus and was blinded and was taken to the house of Ananias. And God said to Ananias, I will show Paul how much he will suffer for my name. And again, as I said, most of the New Testament's letters was written by Paul and born out of the suffering. In fact, most of his letters was written while he was in jail. So Paul's suffering shaped his ministry. But in this suffering, you also see the miracles of God. We read in Acts 16 that Paul was captured with Silas and put in jail in the stocks. And at midnight, after they were beaten, sitting there singing praises. And then the earth started to shake and their chains fell off and they could walk out of the jail. They could find the jail guard and tell him that they have not gone away, and they could even baptize him and his family. So through that experience of suffering, he also saw the miracles of God. And is that not also what we as Christians so often see? It's in really, really hard times that we see the hand of God, the evidence for God in our lives, that he would bring new life and new hope into our situation. But rightfully one can ask, and this is a question that I've heard atheists ask, so what is the God of the universe, the creator of the universe? If you say he created everything from the Big Bang to today, what is he doing on the cursed Roman cross? Couldn't he think about a better idea if he wanted to save people, or can he just not forgive sins? He, Christ, existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. There is one God, the Father, by whom all things were created, and for whom we live. And there is one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things were created, and through whom we live. God sent this Son, Jesus Christ, into the world, not to judge the world, but to save the world. So through our free will, we can choose not to choose God. But God loves us so much because he is love. He is what his love is. And he will come after us because he don't want us to go into eternal damnation, eternally separated from him. But he can also not accept us with our sin because he is too holy. And any righteous judge cannot, if you're guilty, just say, okay, go free. Then you are not a fair judge. So he's got to, if he's a true God and true to himself, he has to punish sin, because that's the right thing to do. That is what our judges do every day. So God will and does punish sin, but he's now put it on his Son so that he can die in our place. Same as with a judge that has given you a fine and you don't have the money to pay the fine, and someone else comes and say, I'll pay it for him, then you're free to go. Your fine has been paid. And the same with us. Our sin is so big, our lives are so unrighteous, that we cannot be acceptable for the perfect, holy God. But for him to be true to himself, to be a fair judge, he has to punish sin. And he's put it all on his Son. That's why the creator of the universe finds himself on a cursed Roman cross, because of the radical love of God. He is a God of contrast. This God that is infinite big is demonstrated in his infinite meekness, in his infinite weakness, which makes him much bigger and greater, because the more you're prepared to go down to serve, the bigger you are. Think of yourselves the way Christ thought of himself. He had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status no matter what, not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of his deity and took the status of a slave. He became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredibly humbling process, but he didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life, then died a selfless, obedient death, the worst kind of death, the crucifixion. And that is to put us, each one of us, right with God, so we can have eternal life, eternal intimate relationship with God. So can I go from here? And what I mean from here is, in this period of COVID-19, can I go from here and just stay the same? We look at this little picture here, we can keep on thinking and pondering of it, or we can get up from here and go and do something about that. And I repeat the words of A.W. Tozer. It is doubtful if God can bless a man greatly unless he's hurt him deeply. God said to Abraham, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great so that you can be a blessing. That's why God blesses us, is for us to go and be a blessing. The same as with Christ. Christ came not for himself. He had everything before he came to earth. But he came down so that he could be a blessing for us. Now Jabez called to God, the God of Israel, saying, oh, that you would bless me indeed and enlarge my territory, that your hand might be with me and that you will keep me from harm, from evil, that it would not pain me. And God granted him his request. And that is my prayer and hope, and I hope for each one of us, that we would ask, God, bless me so I can go out and be a blessing after this time. God, enlarge my territory, make my sphere of influence so much bigger on people to bring them to you, that your hand might be with me to bring the message of your love to people, and that evil will not be able to stop me from doing this. Because before Christ ascended to heaven, this is the words he said, emphasizing, I came here because of my love for you. I died on the cross. I raised. Now go and tell the nations how much I love them. Go then and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe everything that I have commanded you. But we must have the mind of Christ and hold to his thoughts, feelings and purposes in our heart. So the closer we come to Christ, the more he will impart his heart unto us, and it will be impossible for us not to go out and tell the world about his love. And in today's life, it's different from maybe 50 or 100 or 500 years ago. When we tell people about the gospel, in other words, about the love of God, the love of Christ, we must know it's got two hands. The one is knowledge and the other one is love. The first one is knowledge. It's reasons and evidence to trust God. It's not good enough to tell people you need to come to God because the Bible tells you that this is the truth. That is a circular argument which will get you nowhere. You must have good reasons. Know your Bible. Know the reasons why you say something. Know your Bible and have evidence for God. The Bible is full of evidence. When we read it and we're aware of it, we see that God has given us evidence all the time. He will tell the Israelites, look at what I've done in the past for you. I will do it again for you. He gives us evidence. And also in the New Testament, we see the evidence for God all the time. And if we live close to him, we will have evidence in our own lives that we can testify about. Give people evidence. Have good reasons why you believe something, and give the evidence for that. And then the second hand of the gospel is the reality of tangible love. People must see the love in your hands. Christ said that the people will know you, the world will know you because of the love that's in you. And then your heart needs to be touched by God, the one that you're speaking to. So you can bring them the reason for your faith, for trusting God, the evidence for trusting God. They can see the love in you, but then God will touch their hearts. And that is how God works. He makes us partners to bring the gospel to people in everything that we do, in fact. But especially in this, we need to bring the love and the reasons and the knowledge to people, but it's God who will touch the hearts and change their lives. Matthew 22:37 says, love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And in your mind, have the reasons and the evidence for God and why you love him. And always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, and to give a reason for the hope that you have. Do this in kindness, gentleness, and respect.
When we're uncertain, when there is light.